All right, so I'll go ahead and get started then.
Yep.
First, apologies, my voice is a little scratchy on the back end of a cold. Luckily, not bad enough to have to visit National Jewish, so that worked out well. My name is Dave Conder. I'm the co-founder and CTO of Modus. I've been working with Kenneco for more than 10 years, and I've been working with Aaron and Sam's team since we first engaged them in 2012. I was involved in the migration, but I've been heavily involved in this relaunch, redesign process. So Sam and Aaron did a good job sort of setting the stage and explaining their business challenges. What I'd like to do in this chat is go through the technical aspects, some of the things we did, some of the things that are kind of cool, I think, that we extended Kenneco, leveraged Kenneco, things like that. But the first thing I just want to mention, I just wanted to kind of mention in front of everybody is whenever I look back at projects and launches and things like that, I'm always analyzing what went well, what didn't go well, those kinds of things. And consistently in the successful projects, which I consider this to be very successful, hopefully Sam and Aaron do too, one of the things that always pops to mind is the collaboration and the teamwork in the whole process. And so I just want to give a shout out to Sam and Aaron and the whole team. There are all multiple people here. It's been a very collaborative effort. We worked together. They did a ton of work. They lifted a lot of the content aspects, a lot of the real deep Kenneco content things away from us, so we could focus on the heavy lifting. And it was just a really successful effort. And so I just appreciate that. I think it's an example of, as we jump into a large relaunch like this, you run into all kinds of unexpected challenges, changes, direction shifts, those kinds of things. And if you're set up from the get-go to support each other and roll with the punches, as it were, I think that's a tremendous value, and so I just want to mention that. So I'm going to talk very briefly here about the migration. So the migration itself actually was executed primarily by Nick Bushnell here back in 2013. And actually I did a talk on this at the Kenneco Connection Conference in 2013. So I'm not sure if that content is still available publicly or not. But I did do a whole 45-minute presentation on the migration process itself, which is kind of cool. Bottom line was that we were taking very unstructured flat data to structured Kenneco data. And I'm not going to get into the details here. I'd be happy to chat about that separately. Migrations are a special time because they're a time where you can sort of re-envision and re-look at how the different pieces work together. You have a chance to remove what's called rot, redundant, outdated, trivial content, those kinds of things. So we always look at migrations as a very positive thing. They can be challenging, but we built a very iterative process that would just migrate all the content, build it out dynamically. We look at it, tweak things, delete it, do it again. And we actually created this process that was really complex. It took, 12 hours or something to run when we finally did it the last time. But even on top of that, it required a ton of manual intervention by Aaron's team to sort of get it where it needed to go. I won't get into it too much though. I'd be happy to talk about that separately. So when we looked at this relaunch, it's definitely a relaunch. It's not a redesign. It wasn't a rescan. We didn't layer on a bunch of responsive and mobile and those kinds of things. It's a complete new taxonomy, new structure, new relationships. As Aaron and Sam alluded to, it's a big deal for the entire site, the way that everything interacts, the way that users can get to content, search, all those kinds of things. And it's quite large. There's actually over 10,000 documents. There's about 14,000 total documents or pages, although they're not all browsable. So some of them are just metadata, like job titles or whatever. But it's a large site. It's a very large site. And we talked about the migration process itself, which was challenging in a lot of ways because a lot of API changes from version 7 to 8, things like that. But one of the reasons why we convinced Sam and Aaron to do the migration first was because we knew that because the migration or this relaunch was going to be such a big change in the way the content worked, it'd be fairly difficult for us to have them work in parallel while we're working. So what we did is we created the site, or we upgraded the site to 8.2, and then we copied the entire production instance into the new dev instance. We then renamed what was then production to what we call archive. And we set up staging from production to archive. So as they continue to make changes over, I think since March through September, so a long 6-month period there, they can continue to make changes, and we were able to shoot and push those content updates over to the archive site which we can then use to copy content back and forth between sites. It worked really, really well, I think, overall. There were some hiccups here and there. One of the things we learned was that node GUIDs change when you move documents between sites, which is not something we expected. I guess we hadn't run into that before. Document GUIDs don't, but node GUIDs can. And they don't always, and that's, I don't know why. Maybe Brian might have more info on that, but node GUIDs do change. Anyway, the reason I bring this up is because I think it's valuable to understand when you have a big migration like this, using Kennecow's staging tools and then the ability to copy content and move content between sites in the same instance can be a godsend for this kind of process. And we were able to fairly quickly get this process moving once we got there.
The pitch of your hiker is not quite as...
Yeah, my hikers, for us, somewhat, yeah, I think we're somewhat altruistic about it. It was a challenge, for sure. The migration was more complex and more challenging than we expected to version 8 from 7. There's a couple reasons for that, but we learned a lot, and bottom line is, upgrades can be difficult. They're not always difficult, but they can be, and especially if you have a lot of custom code and integrations. It's a lot of work, a lot of testing goes into that. So one of the first things we did is created a new page-based type, and we wanted to use this as a common base for almost all content in the site. So pages, doctors, articles, you name it, we're kind of inheriting from this page type, this base type. This includes a generic page content, page blurb, page image, also calls to action. So one of the things we did is many of the pages in the site have, you'll notice in the top right or on mobile they're a little different, but you have these calls to action. You have a primary and you have secondaries. So make an appointment is the primary, donations and contact are secondary. Well, a lot of pages use the same calls to action. Some need to be different, some need to be editable easily. So we created a call to action tool that lets you manage the primary, but then the secondary is simply a text box that lets you have the text, semicolon, URL, and you can just enter that really quickly. You don't have to create a list, you don't have to create items in the tree, that kind of thing for those links. So it's really easy. Also some other things, this is a simple thing, but it saves a ton of time, and that's to move categories and other elements of content that may be in other tabs onto the form tab. So when you're on the form tab itself, you can edit those directly in place. You can do that with relationships, you can do that with pretty much anything that exists on the other tabs in Kennecow if you're familiar with the interface. And you can put those in the form tab, and that just saves a tremendous amount of time. You don't have to click between different things. One thing I want to mention too on this page-based type. So a lot of the repeaters and the transformations that we use these common fields. So we have sort of a baseline interface that we can leverage consistently. We don't have to have 30 different transformations for different content types. They all sort of follow this convention, so we can use the same transformation in multiple places, which is a big time saver. So another thing we had to do for the site is create a bunch of custom tools. In fact, there's probably about another 10 or so that are even more custom, that they were never even exposed. They're just sort of back-end console applications and whatnot to clean up data. But these are the ones that are exposed on the actual CMS, and I know Aaron's team has seen some of these. Things like a bulk template change, the ability to select entire swaths of content by class name or path, and then assign a template, either inherit the parent or just assign a template in place. That was key for when you're doing the upgrade as we move to new templates. We needed to do that quickly without manually touching every single piece of content and changing the template. We also had a lot of content in the old site that was in web parts and WYSIWYG web parts in the page tab. We created a tool that allowed Aaron's team, when they saved it, would automatically pre-populate the form tab with that new base field that I mentioned before. So when they just hit save, they had a starting point. They didn't have to copy and paste and switch tabs and that kind of thing. Relationships. So Kennecow relationships, when you relate documents to each other, they're based on the GUIDs of those documents. If you copy 2 documents to the new site from the archive to the new dev, or new relaunch site, those relationships don't maintain because they're different GUIDs, they have different IDs. So we created a tool that will, for any given document on the new site, if it finds the same document in the old site, it will find the relationships and copy them over. And that was really useful. We created a migration log for Aaron's team to be able to manage their process of who's done what needs to be done, that kind of thing. And then this is a single line here, but it's actually pretty complex. So there are over 20,000 URLs, either actual document URLs, the main alias, or additional document aliases. We wanted to maintain SEO through the whole process, so we were able to analyze that. I'll talk about that here in a sec. Analyze those, export them, make sure they're mapped in the new dev site, and then test them. And then just another tool that Blue Modus, one of the things we always implement in our sites is what we call Save Robots text. And it's basically the same as the built-in Keneco robots text, except for it has one difference, and that is you have to whitelist the domains that will allow search engines to crawl your site. So you don't accidentally expose your dev sites to have search engines crawl them. So unless you say www.nationaljewish.org is whitelisted, any other domain that's being used, dev, stage, whatever, it will automatically do a disallow all on the robots text, and that will help us from getting indexed when we don't want to. So about those URL aliases. So we exported them all. There's over 20,000. We have some tools to crawl those and report back. You know, we actually found a lot of 404s and other issues, and so we kind of kept that in mind as we went through it. But we ran the same crawl against dev and found the gaps, and then we're able to remap all of the URLs. So we ended up with 14 actual URLs that are potentially usable, vanity URLs, multiple aliases for pages, you know, that kind of thing. And so that was a pretty complex process, but it's something you always have to think of. You have to have a target for existing URLs. Yeah, you're going to be able to update your sitemap and all that, but you may have bookmark links, you may have other things. So it's really important to make sure that those URLs are brought over and safely redirecting with proper redirects to the actual page it should be. So Sam and Aaron did mention taxonomy. That's a huge thing. I think in this entire relaunch, that is the single largest functional element, both in terms of the technical development, but really in terms of the value of the site. Being able to group families of content together so you don't go through those gopher holes. Keneco can do a lot of this out of the box, but it didn't really have the flexibility just out of the box to do what we really needed it to do. So you can use categories, for example. There's relationships categories, linked documents, tags. There's all kinds of ways, the actual tree itself. There's all kinds of ways to create taxonomy, but we needed something deeper, and I'll kind of talk about what that looked like. Now, I'm not a product marketer, so you know, when it comes to naming, you know, for me it's pretty simple. What's better than categories is super categories. So this is something that I just came up with. It's probably not what we'll call it, but it's something that we would like to release this as an open source project because it's a cool module that we think we can let other people benefit from. So what super categories do is it takes 4 key things, and this can be different things, but in National Jewish's sort of semantics, it's really 4 things. It's the adult pediatric status of content, whatever that is. Typically it doesn't cross over. It's either adult or it's pediatric. Then you create a list of specific page types, paths, and category families. I call them families because what they are is when you look at the categories, we have root level categories like specialties and conditions. Those are families. And so what we did is we created a system that allows us to, when you tag content, so let's say you have on a given asthma, for example, or allergy, I think this came from, you say this is allergy and immunology on specialties, it's also allergy and conditions, and it's adult. So based on that, then anytime you use these macros or these repeaters to grab these related content from other areas, so for example, tests, support groups and events, conditions, programs, they will automatically find all the content in the tree that matches those 4 things. And so what this allowed the team to do is while we're developing, Aaron's team is able to go in and actually categorize a lot of the content on the old site using just categories, and then when we relaunch, we're able to actually take that and the system would sort of automatically map it. Now this took a few iterations for us to get this right. For example, paths was not something we had included initially, but then we found out that there's a lot of content that we want to exclude or specifically include in these relationships or the super categories. But the bottom line is that, like I said, on any given page, so if you go to the site and you look at the asthma, for example, you'll find all kinds of related items. And this is what Sam and Aaron were talking about earlier. They're all related, and the only relationship they have is they're sharing certain categories, which is really easy because all the categories in one place. So for example, cirrhosis of the liver would have been tagged with this condition flag. That might not be exactly right, I'm not sure, right? But if cirrhosis was tagged with the same condition that allergy was, and it's in the right path, then we think it will show up automatically. So a couple of examples. So this is on the conditions we treat. The adult pediatric value, so it's one or the other. And then for conditions, it's only going to grab NJH.condition and menu item page types, only grab anything inside these families, and only in that path. And automatically it just works. And then you can see the list of conditions will appear automatically, and there's no other work they have to do. All they have to do is really go in and edit the categories, which are on the form tab, which makes it easy. And I know Tasha spent a lot of time doing that, so. But it worked out pretty well. Another example is, in this case, related programs. It's just services and menu items, and then it's in these category families and in these paths. And so that model worked really well for us. Again, it took some time, but I think that the model itself makes a lot of sense because you're creating much more contextual relationships beyond just the same category or the same type of page. It's using that business logic on multiple levels to break it out. So something we're looking to do is actually extend this and make it a module that is something that we can include in some of the open source projects that Kenneco has. So that's something that we are looking to do in the next few months. So another thing that we ran into is complex sub-navigation. So if you look at the site, you'll see a sub-nav item on the left of most pages. The top level pages don't have it, but really anything down below has those. And the rules for that really vary quite dramatically depending on where you are. In many cases, you can use the path expressions here, and this is a really great feature of Kenneco. So basically, when you're looking at the subnav, which is a hierarchical viewer, which has 3 different levels of content, it will take the parent, the second level parent, and the third level parent, or the tertiary parent, and just replace that with the actual value automatically, which is a tremendous thing. If you haven't used this before, they're very powerful. But even in addition to that, we had to create some that would create more complex business logic where you can specify almost the offset of where you are on the page, where do you want that nav to start from? And so you have that flexibility to do that in different places. Another thing that is kind of interesting taxonomy-wise is the concept of health insights. And so health insights are, they're dynamically identified, so they can be a lot of different types of content. They're actually configured using super categories. So it could be a page, it could be an event, it could be a news article, that kind of thing. But the health insights they appear all over the site, and they're almost like little snippets of news or useful information. You'll see them in the bottom of, this is the health insights page, but you'll see them in the bottom of many of the specialties pages, where you're getting this related content. And again, it's just really useful. But the cool thing about these health insights is that it can be all kinds of different content, and you're not really boxed into it's got to be a news article or whatever. It can just be, and this is, to me, this is what the value of the super categories approach really brings to the table, is being very flexible, creating this sort of pseudo type of page that can appear anywhere that's comprised of multiple page types, multiple locations, that kind of thing, and simply by the categorization it appears in the right place. Sam mentioned the press gain integration. This is really cool. A lot of work behind the scenes to make it work, but it's API driven, heavy caching, that kind of thing, updates automatically. But then you end up with the ratings, obviously, which is really nice, but then you also get the rich snippets in Google coming from the schema.org implementation. So if you look at the HTML of these, you'll see schema.org tags buried in here that explain, this is a physician, this is a rating, this is a review, and then search engines will automatically pick that up and display those rich snippets. Search, I recommend you look at the site, take a look at it. Searching by staff is pretty robust. It uses smart search, but we're also being able to filter by a bunch of different things, last name, all that. And then you got a nice mobile view with the rating. On mobile, it's a different experience because you don't want modals on mobile. So, for example, if you click on a doctor on mobile, it'll go straight to the doctor's profile instead of an overlay. Search for conditions and programs. This is primarily JavaScript driven, so we created a method that will break all the content that's pulled from the business logic that decides what is a program and service, what is a condition, and then it splits it by letters. And then via JavaScript, we're filtering and sorting, so you have a real-time able to filter by letter, or you can type in something and instantly get results. It's all JavaScript driven. And then the full site search is really just using Smart Search, but we do have a couple of things we're doing. For example, if you tab through these different tabs, programs, health info, doctors, and more, etc., you'll get a different query string. That query string is going to feed into the web part, which has a macro condition that will spit out the proper page types and things and indexes based on what type of thing you're searching. So we actually are running about 8 different indexes. There's a crawler index because there's a lot of content that's not in the form tab in some cases, and then we have other indexes as well, but the search is unified and has a kind of continuous feel as you go through it. So this is another thing that I think content-wise has really worked really well for us, and that is using Bootstrap Layout widgets. So there is on the Kaneko Marketplace, there is a Bootstrap Layout widget module, which is free. And I highly recommend it if you're using Bootstrap. We like to use Bootstrap as our CSS framework, our responsive framework. What Bootstrap Layout widgets let you do is create layouts. Like in this case, this is a microsite, event microsite. You can create Bootstrap layouts. So you can say this is Bootstrap's based on 12 columns. You can say that the left column is going to be, in this case, looks like 8, and this one's 4. And then once you do that, you get additional widget zones that open up, and you can drop in widgets into there. And we did the same thing as well for accordions, Bootstrap accordions, and we created one for Bootstrap tabs as well. So anywhere you see on the site, those tabs or accordions, they're using the same kind of model too. Something else we did to help the team make their job hopefully a little easier is for our event microsites and other microsites as well. There's a lot of scaffolding that happens when you create them. So for example, you create an event microsite, it'll automatically scaffold up the structure of what that needs to look like. So it'll assign the right templates, it'll create the overview page, it'll create the sponsors folder, and then the template itself is sort of predisposed for you to edit with Bootstrap layouts. So automatically just start building it out. So you can add pages underneath the development event. It will automatically, it's hard to tell, but this is actually a microsite template. It's got a different top nav on the top. It's got a different footer. And that process allows Aaron's team to create these a little bit easier than manually creating sort of microsites. They just sort of right-click. We use global events for that, so on the creation of a event microsite item, it'll go in and do the logic, create the scaffolding it needs to make it easier. You can also style the entire thing, so the colors, you can see this is sort of a test, it's kind of wild, but different colors here, and you can manage all that just at the top level, and it just propagates automatically. One of the things we created was a macro method called get self or parent property, and what that'll do is if the current page doesn't have a property for the calendar color, then it'll automatically crawl up the tree until it finds its first ancestor that has that property, and then apply that, and it caches it, and it avoids infinite loops and all that in case it doesn't find it. So there's a lot more to it. I think the, for us, exciting thing is obviously getting this relaunch done. Opens up all kinds of floodgates, as Sam mentioned, for people actually looking at the site again and providing feedback. And so for us, the next things we're going to be looking at is helping with EMS and really leveraging some of the features in EMS, I think both in terms of testing, but also with content personalization and other more advanced features, as well as marketing automation. That's going to be the exciting next steps for us. So there's a lot going on. And again, I'd like to thank Sam and Aaron and the whole entire team. It's been a really fun project, very challenging in many ways, but very rewarding for me at least. And it's just another example, I think, of Kaneko as a platform. It's just a tremendously flexible tool that just lets us do things that would be very, very difficult in other platforms. So at that, I'd just like to say thanks for your time. Thanks for coming out today. You can find me at dconner@bluemodus.com. Available anytime. Happy to answer any questions you have. I'll be around afterwards as well. If you have any questions technically, I'm happy to take that offline.